So a while ago I made a video on how to make a progressive bass line, and I got a lot of questions, or at least more than one question, on how you would take that bass line and turn it into like a full drop. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Hello, I quickly wanted to say if you want to support this channel, you can do so by listening to my music on Spotify or Apple Music, or by going to my website and looking at some of my products. There are even free ones that you can download really easily. Alternatively, if you're interested in private lessons, I also provide those, and all the information for that you can also find on my website. So we're just going to jump straight into it. This is the project, and I'll just play you the bass line that we have previously discussed in the older video. If you haven't seen that video, then this is what I'm making in that video. So let's just take a listen. I discuss how you can make all of these sounds, the 10 different bass sounds that make up that loop, how you can process them, and also something about arrangement. And now I want to go over some more of the general arrangement of a full drop, what you might want to consider, what elements that you might want to add to it, and how you can take that small idea and build onto it. So again, just like before, I just want to play through the whole thing to give you an idea what we're actually discussing. See if you like the end result, then you can stick around for the full tutorial. So let's have a listen to that.
People on the dance floor.
So that's what we'll be discussing today, and I just want to go into it and show you the different elements that I used first of all to create this drop, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the finer details of it, some considerations you would need to make for some of the more finer details of a drop like this. So you can see it kind of consists out of 4 different elements. What I've created here, we have our extra drums, we have some vocals, we have some leads, and we have some atmospheres. And those are basically your 4 main elements where you give your character to the drop. I've kind of overdone the atmospheres here because I personally like atmospheres a lot. Usually for progressive psytrance, atmospheres are rarely used, but I really liked how they sit in this track and how they give it the dark kind of texture and the dark kind of quality that I was after. Another thing that you might want to consider is adding some more effects, but that's something that I actually want to cover in a separate video. I have an effect sample pack coming up, and I want to chain a video just like I did with the atmosphere pack that I recently released, and just go over all of the theory behind transitioning, effects, stuff like that. That pack is just in the works still, and that needs a lot more time to actually be finished, so that will be a project for the future. But for now, let's go just into the drums, and let's see what's actually happening within the drums here. So I'm just going to go over my main drum loop first, and that's made out of a whole bunch of different samples. We have some hats, as you can see, we have a clap, we have a ride, and some foley, which just plays every once in a while to add some interest. So you can basically look at the first 4 elements here, so the 3 different hats and the clap here. In normal psytrance, but in most dance music, what is often happening is that the clap hits at the 2 and the 4. So if we zoom in here, we have the first beat, we have the second, we have the third, and then we have the 4th. So that is where the clap hits. Now what I've done for this clap is that I've actually layered 2 different sounds on top of each other. So we're going with this bright clap here, which sounds like this. And then we have this pre-shifted clap, which just adds a little bit of groove to it. And you can see if I zoom in that it's actually starting to play before it. And there's just a little bit of sound which kind of slides into where the clap actually hits. So this is the main body of the clap, and then this is just a little bit of an attack, a little bit of announcing the sound is coming. Then for the hats, how I've divided it up is that I basically use a main hat and then some added layers to it. So for example, this is our main hat here, And the cool thing about this main hat is that it's very static. It just continues to play the same rhythm over and over again. You can hear and also see that in the terms of the spacing. And these hats obviously line up with different bass notes that I'm playing. So here, if we look in the MIDI, you can see that here we have a bass note. If I select Ctrl 3, you can actually see it more clearly. There's a bass note right there. It's a little bit hard to see, but if I move this back a little bit, you can see the start of the bass note lines up, you see, right with the hi-hat. And that's true for all hi-hats, by the way, not just for this one. So to complement that main hi-hat, what we have is we have added some extra hi-hats, which just add a little bit of extra groove, and these therefore don't play a static rhythm. The rhythm is not just once a beat like this one is, only not on the beat of the kick, but on a different time signature, right? There's always the same spacing. Here there's different spacings between the different layers here, and that just gives it the groove. So that's the main drum loop. As I said, we have a little bit of a ride and that Foley, which you also heard. It's nothing special, just a little bit of interest which you can add to different sections of the track. For example, here at the last bar I have just a little bit of extra interest to give some extra brightness to that section. The next element that I'm playing is this tom loop here, and this just plays every once in a while to kind of announce the next section. So for example, here we have one, and if I add the kick and the bass as well, you can hear how it announces the kick and the bass coming back. Here it is part of this fill. So here for this fill, if I go back, or you can see it like this, here we have the kick, then we have the tom, and then we have this drum fill here, which therefore sounds like this. It's just to get a little bit of extra movement in that fill. Without it, it sounds a little bit too empty here. So this is a very situational kind of sample. Wherever you need a little bit of space being filled up by like a drum element, then something like a tom like this is very nice to use. So quickly about that fill, now we're here. This is just a Cashmere sample that I kind of cut up and rearranged myself. I did some warping on it and I resampled it. As you can see, it is actually consolidated. You can see that from the date here, which means that the resampling isn't actually shown here anymore. But this gives you the new waveform, so that's a little bit easier to deal with. If you go into this fill, you will see that I had to retime this fill if you have this sample. Again, this fill serves the same function as that tom before, in the sense that it announces the next section coming. So we heard it before when I played this whole thing. It's kind of guiding you into the next section of the drop. The final two elements, which are very important in this track because there are no effects in it yet, are this crash and this reverse crash. I believe these are the same or very similar samples. They are different samples. As you can see, this is a number 5 and this is number 4. But they sound good together and they just kind of guide the energy of the track, making it sound like the energy is going up or down. So it sounds like this on its own. So the next elements that I want to talk about are the vocals. As you can see, I have them laid out right here in the project, and we're just going to go down throughout the project and talk about the different elements from top to bottom. I think that's the most logical progression to go for here. So what I know about progressive psytrance, I'm not a progressive psytrance artist myself, but listening to some tracks and knowing what I know about psytrance itself, progressive is very much geared towards the hype element. Right, kind of like the Armin van Buuren stuff, the Timmy Trumpet stuff. If you go into that kind of scene, then you're less geared towards the trance effect and more towards the kind of standard EDM dance hype effect that you hear in a lot of those tracks. And vocals play a very big role in that. So I added some different vocals. I'll just play them on their own so you can hear them. We have this sample that says jump. We have a sample that says, I believe, woo. And then we have a sample that says hey. I think most of these, are from the Cashmere pack. And then I have this Pro Vocal Shouts pack, which I downloaded a long time ago with a bunch of different sampled vocals from popular EDM tracks. And I picked one from that which I thought sounded cool. And together they make this.
2,000 people on the dance floor. Jump.
So cool thing to note about this hey, what this actually does is it layers on top of the kick, so it gives the kick some extra power. So let's just listen to that. You can hear it just adds a little bit of extra mid-range to the kick and gives it a little bit of a bigger vibe. An effect like this with the vocals comes through much more if we listen to the full track. So I'll just quickly again play the full track and then I'll toggle on and off between having the vocals and not having them, and then you can hear what it actually does to your track.
People on it.
So the next elements are the leads. Progressive Psytrance isn't really known for their leads. They're more known for their basses just kind of being on their own and filling the full spectrum. So I had a little bit of trouble with the leads, but I did want to add some extra interest because otherwise you would just have the bass line, and even though we have a different pattern for the bass line later, which I'll talk about after we go through all of these elements, I did want to add some more interest to it, and I found that leads work well for that. So the leads that I used are actually from a pack for Vital by Dash Glitch, who recently released a pack called Glitch Psytrance Essentials Volume 3, and that has a whole bunch of different presets that you can use. This is geared a little bit more towards full-on Psytrance, but I found that it also worked well if you use it sparsely within like a progressive track. So let's listen to just the leads on their own. And you can hear the kind of sparse nature that I have. I'm not going overly crazy. It's not like an acid loop or anything like that. It's just once in a while adds a little bit of extra mid-range texture on top of the bass lines and whatever atmosphere that we have. The final elements are my atmospheres. As I said, I wanted this track to be a little bit more atmospheric than I would usually want for like a progressive track, because that's the kind of style that I like. And I also found it works really well with the bass line that I'll talk about a little bit later. So these are from my pack. I did nothing really special to them other than just drag them in here and play them. I'll just quickly let you listen to them, although they're not that interesting. I've done plenty of videos on atmospheres. So looking at these waveforms, what you will notice is that we basically have 4 sections to it. So these 2 atmospheres are section 1 and 2. And then this atmosphere basically has a 2 and a 3 section here, where it fades between one and another kind of sound here. Before it's just fairly dark sounding. Whereas here it kind of gets a squeaky or metallic quality to it. So it sounds like this. And just having that together with the 4 different sections of our bass line, or in general the 4 different sections of your track that you can divide even like your whole track in, that just helps emphasize that effect. So as I mentioned before, I wanted to talk also a little bit about the details that you would need to look out for. And the first one is to not have the same loop over and over again. As you can see, we're starting off with this loop exactly equally. You can see if I copy it over, it's the exact same thing. None of the MIDI notes change. But for the next rotation of this idea, or the next section of this idea, you can already see one change. And that is that there is this note here as well, instead of this note. And here we're just muting a note so that we have some room for that tom there. But that's not really that important. The main thing is that we're changing the actual note being played here. So instead of this, we have this. And that just gives it a little bit of difference so that you still recognize the original idea, but it does trigger something in like, hey, there's a difference in there, and it makes it more interesting. We then take that whole idea and duplicate it once more. The only difference here is that for the last bar we have left room for the fill and the vocal and all of the other stuff that is happening. But then we go to a completely different idea, and this is where keeping the interest is really important. If I were to constantly use the same bass line over and over again, at some point we would get bored of that. So here I decided to come up with a whole new progression, which sounds like this. And that just kind of repeats one more time. Now the idea behind this was to give this a little bit more power by focusing a little bit more on that basic triplet bass line. I really like the powerful sound that you get from just the kick and the triplet bass line together. It just sounds really powerful to me, and I really like the sound that that gives, so I wanted to emphasize that a little bit more. Therefore I decided to focus more on that, and that's also where the idea of having a dark atmospheric tone under this section came into. Now some more tips that I want to give if you're coming from traditional Psytrance. What you might find is that progressive Psytrance tend to have shorter drops, so you'll have less trouble filling up a complete drop just because there's less work in the full drop. That does mean that you need to keep more interest into the breaks, and that the breaks are usually also a little bit longer. What this also means for the breaks of these kind of tracks is that you usually have a lot more stronger theming in them. There's usually like a main vocal theme, and then there will be main instrument themes. Maybe there's like a flute or string section or just a choir or something like that. Usually there's at least a few elements that really pique your interest in the breaks and really set the tone and make the track recognizable. And that's really what the theme is meant to do. In this case, what I would say for this track is that the only real theming that is really memorable would be this vocal shout. If this was a well-known released Psytrance track and you would hear that vocal shout somewhere else, then you would immediately start thinking back to this track if you were to know it. And that's really what the theming element is all about. It's to keep your track memorable so that if something similar sounds in a person's life, then that they can relate that to your track and they will remember your track and they may play it once more. It also helps people after a night of clubbing going back on their computer trying to find that wild track that they were listening to. It's easier to recognize in that situation as well. And with progressive Psytrance being more club oriented, that effect is obviously more important than it would be for a normal trance song. So this was everything that I wanted to say about this project now. I just wanted to show you how I would develop this out into a full drop and how I would play around with the different elements. If there are any questions that you have, then you can leave them in the comments below. I do read all of the comments even if you're late to this video, because they just show up in my feed and I will have the newest comments first regardless of how old the video is. If you enjoyed this video, then you can leave a like, and if you're new here and you want to see more, then you can subscribe. There's also a notification feature. There's a little bell icon. If you click that and you select all, then YouTube will show you all of the videos as a notification when they come out, when I upload them. That way you're always up to date with what I'm doing. But that's going to be the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.